mouth before I go into the house. Cabbage is cooking on the coal stove. My ma's at the zinc table wrapping pieces of ground meat into the cabbage leaves, which is what us Polacks call pigs in a blanket. I'm hungry as hell, but my guts feel twisted up since we walked away from that drainage. I don't feel much like eating. My ma's bitching. Them twins ain't back from the 40 rock dump with the coal for tonight. She says, it's getting damn late. They'll be all right, my sister Lottie says. Them kids has been going down to that coal dump since the strike started 6 months ago. Lottie's next oldest to Buzzy. She's almost 17 and don't take no shit. She's got long hair, dark as percolator coffee, and bright green eyes. She's pretty enough. Most everybody takes her shit. Well, except for me and Buzzy. We laugh and tell her she must think she's the Queen of England, always running around, pulling her hair back and pushing her tits together in the kitchen mirror. My ma is stirring cabbage leaves into tomorrow's soup and yelling for me and Buzzy to go down to the rock dump and get them twins. Stop fooling with your tresses, she tells Lottie. Get them potatoes ready. We're going to sit down to eat as soon as the twins get back. Buzzy's idling in the parlor. I go in and sit down next to him. He's already got on dry pants and his bare feet are propped up on the sofa. The baseball's on the radio, but he don't look to be listening none. I ain't going to no slag heap to get them twins, he yells. Send Johnny. Now, I know this is crazy because Johnny's 8, but he's slow in the head. He probably couldn't even find the rock dump, let alone the twins, and sure not his way home if he did get there. I poke Buzzy in the ribs. Ask him what he's thinking. Ask him if he's drunk. He shushes me with his finger and pulls me closer to him on the sofa. Quiet, he says. I don't want us seen outside the house no more tonight. My mother yells again from the kitchen about fetching the twins, Esther and Frankie. Buzzy jabs his fingertip into my chest, keeping me on the couch. Send Johnny down there. He don't do shit all day. My ma drops the lid back on the soup pot. She comes stomping into the parlor. She's a big woman and heavy, so the floor squeaks when she walks. When she comes into the parlor, she's glaring, and the floor sounds like somebody's killing a rat. She's yelling at Buzzy for being so selfish and lazy. Then she sees my face is all swollen and cut. Chester Pistakowski, she says, the hell happened to you? I look at Buzzy, then at the radio, and finally at the big crucifix up on the parlor wall. I start to say something about scrapping with some boys from 37, but my mom don't let me talk. She just starts in on Buzzy, telling him he's no good, telling him he'll get me in deep someday. It was a fair fight, is all Buzzy says to my mom. I can see him rubbing his fingers together like he got nerves. He's looking out the window watching the street. He ain't even looking at our ma, no matter what kind of stuff she says to him. In the middle of getting yelled at, Buzzy just gets up and drifts into the kitchen. My ma follows him, but she should know not to keep on with Buzzy like that, because he'll take a poke first, and he ain't going to confession no time soon. Staring out of the kitchen window, Buzzy finally says something. He says, well, the twins is back. I race over to the window and look out, and I see Esther and Frankie coming down through the yard past the shit house and the chicken coop. They're near 10, but they're stooped over from carrying flour sacks of coal from the rock dump. When they come in, my ma gives them hell for taking so long. How yin's going to stay in the 4th grade? You can't even fetch coal, she says. Frankie shrugs and takes the coal to the bin in the cellar. Esther stands in the middle of the kitchen, fisting up the linen of her dress. She's shouting about how they had to go down 3rd Street because all the Pinkertons is up and down 2nd. What you mean the Pinkertons? Buzzy asks. He looks at Esther with his lips curled and his eyes pinned. I could see he's wound up and good. Frankie comes running back up from the basement all excited. He says, they was on horses coming up 2nd Street. We watched them from behind Zacek's chicken coop. They was banging on doors, going into houses. They was getting men in their yard. Give some a beating, my sister Esther says, her eyes wide. How bad a beating, I ask. Buzzy grabs hold of my shirt. He says, don't worry about how bad a beating. He pulls me across the kitchen to the stairs, sets me on my ass on the bottom step. Yanking on my ear, he pulls my face right in breathing distance of his so no one can hear what he's going to tell me. He pushes his finger hard into my cheek, right below the cut. "You're going into the attic," he says. "You got to wait till I come for you, Chester." Buzzy scowls and pushes his mouth right up to my ear and says real soft, "This ain't no bullshit. You know these is hard men. You do what I tell you." "Okay," I say. Buzzy steps back, stands up. He says to everyone, "Chet's already been in one fight today. He don't need to be in another one." My ma's blessing herself, and I could see she don't believe a word of this, but she ain't gonna ask no questions neither. "Don't be saying nothing about Chester," she points her finger at the twins. I don't like to be chickening out at nothing, but I ain't gonna argue with Buzzy. I scram up the steps and open the door to the attic. I'm trying to get the steamer trunk pushed over so I can reach the ladder to get in when Lottie comes trotting up the stairs. Turning to face her, I take a deep breath, thinking she's come to give me hell for causing trouble. But she puts a roll in each of my hands. She says, "I thought you might be hungry." I take a bite of one of them rolls and tell her thanks. She flashes her green eyes down at the linoleum floor. Pushing her foot around a bit, she says, "Chester, you got to be careful running with Buzzy. He ain't exactly bad, but he's so full of mad he don't always think about what's going to happen." I think I understand what she means, but I can't say nothing against Buzzy. I just tell her thanks for the rolls again. She gives me a smile and helps me push the trunk up over to the ladder. When she goes down the stairs to help my ma, I hear them dishes clatter as they get supper on the table. I climb up the ladder and push the whitewash board back away from the opening and yank myself into the attic. It's dark and cool enough. I want to go back down to the kitchen and ask Buzzy for his coat. Instead, I light up a candle, put the board back. There's a couple of boxes of shit my ma brought up from West Virginia lying around. Drop my ass down onto one of them. I'm sitting there quiet, chewing up the rest of them rolls, which is hard work because my jaw hurts like hell when I open my mouth. I hope my jaw ain't broke. I wouldn't mind so much a scar from this cut. That looked pretty hard and all, but a broken jaw? No thanks. After them rolls is gone, I'm still hungry. I'm getting bored of setting. I can smell dinner cooking down there, the cabbage and the meat. I'm listening real careful to what's going on downstairs. But all I hear is the sounds of them eating supper. They don't talk much, but I'm right above the kitchen, so I can hear them banging plates and bowls. I'm thinking about the first time I seen the Pinkertons. It was back April this year, 1922, right after the coal strike started up. Me and Buzzy was walking home from the first big union meeting out on Garula's farm. Them Pinkertons come into town on horses, and we watched them ride down Joe Smolko and Lefty Jankowski, who was both motormen, up Eureka 37. They chased them right up 9th Street past Eureka stores. When they caught him, the Pinkertons busted Joe and Lefty up with the blackjack and good. Beat them till their faces was so swole they couldn't see nothing. Buzzy told me that was revenge for the two of them wrecking a motor on the way into number 37 mine on the first day of the strike. "Open up, you damn Polacks!" I hear somebody saying this, and I crawl over to the side of the attic, where there's a little slatted window at the peak of the roof. Looking out from between the slats, I can see these Pinkerton bastards are on my neighbor's porch. There's two of them in their blue suits all dolled up to look like the police. They're beating the door with a blackjack and yelling for old man Kosturku to come out. I want to say maybe they ain't opening the door because them's Hungarians in that house, not Polacks, but I see two more of these sons of bitches ride up to our house on dark horses. These two climb out and make out for the front door. One is tall and heavyset with a mustache, and it comes down past his mouth. He's already got the blackjack out. He's slapping it against his leg. The other son of a bitch is sawed off and none too steady on his feet. The big one starts cracking his blackjack into our door. "Come on, you Polacks, open this goddamn door." I hear feet shuffling across the floor and the key turning in the lock. I shift myself forward so I can get a better look at what's going on. I watch the door open a crack and see a wedge of light shining onto the porch. Then the fat son of a bitch opens and drops the shoulder into the door and it goes flying back, the doorknob smashing up against the wall. My ma's shouting high-pitched, and these bastards rampage their way into our house. I hear furniture getting splintered and dishes shattering. They're screaming, and these bastards is calling my ma a stupid Polak bitch. "Where's your husband?" one's asking. I can hear everything pretty clear because the walls of these Patchtown houses are as thin as paper. My ma is acting like she don't speak no English. She just keeps saying, Jesu Sawali Nam, just Polish for Jesus, save us. Listening to them cursing my mom, my stomach tightens up. My nostrils are pulling apart. I want to spring straight down there and give him what for, but I told Buzzy I'd stick here. I hear a crash like a big piece of furniture getting busted up. That's when I finally hear Buzzy. His voice is loud and clear and mean as hell. It's the one he uses when somebody just got whipped bad enough for it to last a while, but he ain't done near whipping. He says, anything else you bastards want? Then there's more crashing and more yelling. Buzzy's yelling, the sons of bitches is yelling, plates is shattering, and the parlor walls are shaking like the San Francisco earthquake is rattling our kitchen to pieces. Then there's a crack. And everything goes pretty quiet until one of the Pinkertons says to take Buzzy out in the backyard. I crawl over the boxes, rush into the slat window on the other side of the attic to see them dragging Buzzy out the back door. Both them Cossacks is covered with food, and their uniforms is tore. The short one's got his lips split, and blood's run down his neck and dripped into the front of the white shirt. Buzzy's kicking and struggling, but the big bastard's got him in some kind of wrestling hold. Help this boy out, Jim, big one says. The short one pulls his blackjack out and gives Buzzy two real quick across the belly. Buzzy coughs, but I can see he's still ready to go. The big Pinkerton must see it too, because he jerks Buzzy's head back by the hair. Help him out some more, Jim. This time the little Pinkertons gives Buzzy the blackjack across his knee. Buzzy's face is all screwed up, and he's hollering like it hurt pretty good. One more time. After another crack at Buzzy's knee, the big bastard Cossack lets him go and shoves him forward into the yard. He stomps on Buzzy's hand and asks what we know about scabs getting chased home from Eureka 40. Buzzy just groans and tells him to go piss up a tree. The little one says he probably don't know nothing anyhow. He says Pollock's is just too stupid to cause that much trouble. Then each of them bastards gives Buzzy a kick in the belly before they go peacocking back through the yard to their horses. Buzzy's still laying there, his bare feet wriggling out of the legs of his dungarees, when them bastards climb up into the saddle and clomp away down 2nd Street toward the Pick-Me store.
Thank you. That was delightful. As I said at the outset, and some of you may not have been on yet, what's more wonderful than being read to on a Sunday afternoon? That was really delightful. Now, Dr. Dressick, if you could share with us some of the background, how you came to write the book and why this was the topic you chose, and sort of your journey along the way. We are a little bit behind today because of our technical glitches to begin with. So I think we can extend the schedule by about 10 minutes from what we had before. But again, please have at it.
Oh, no worries. No, it's funny. People, I was just, I'd never been interviewed by the newspaper before, and it happened thanks to Lawrence and whoever helped, other folks helped set that up. And I was asked about research for this book, and I started talking about my formal research process. So I'll say a little bit about that later. But I thought about it for the last 3 or 4 days. And I'll be honest with y'all, the research for this book for me started when I was about 5 years old. My father worked in the steel mill. He did shift work, and I spent a lot of time with an elderly neighbor, a man named Frank Lasowski, lived across the street. And he was a retired miner, and he'd retired kind of young. He had black lung. And I'd sit with this man, and he's very generous with his time with me. And he talked, I was very curious about what it was like to be an adult. He was the adult I was around. And he talked a lot about working in the mines before the union came in. And these are the first stories I remember from being a boy. And what it was like to work in a place where you were paid in scrip and where you had to spend whatever money you got at the company's store. And the idea of the blacklist, that if you did anything to in any way displease the only employer in town, that you'd be put on a list and be unable to find work. And I was a little boy. I'd say, well, why can't they just move away? He's like, well, didn't you hear the part about they didn't pay you in actual money? It's like, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess they got you kind of trapped. And he talked about men during labor disputes changing their names and going, oh, I got blacklisted at 37. Well, nobody knows me out at Mine 42, another Patchtown around Wilmer. So yeah, I used to be Dombrowski. I'm gonna change my name to Jankowski, and now I'm gonna get work. And this is something, this is part of his actual lived experience. So that was the kind of where I got really interested in thinking about this. But the incident that I've just read about, my grandfather was also a coal miner around Windsor, Pennsylvania, and he was not a big storyteller. He was a different kind of person altogether. He was very funny and very witty, but he wasn't a storyteller. One of the only stories he told, and he told it, this is the thing that blew me away, he told it flat. It wasn't like a very kind of raconteur or wild storytelling thing. He told the story about it's when he was 14 in the 22 strike, about they used to go in the woods. It's just, just like sort of I'd tell you about, maybe I went fishing last week. It's like, yeah, we used to go in the woods and we'd wait in there until the scabs were on the way home from the mine. They brought the scabs in on us, he said, and we'd chase them home with sticks, and then the older men would dynamite the houses. I was like, well, that's really something. And then I was in college, and this is studying a lot of literature of the 20s. I was very fortunate to study with Carol Grimes, who was an expert on Hemingway, and Dick Strojan, who's a scholar of Fitzgerald. And they talked a lot about the 20s. I said, well, all the stuff you're talking about, the roaring 20s, and Fitzgerald, he says, it was a decade in which the top 10% of America lived like royalty. I thought about that, and I said, well, that's true, but that's never all the stories I ever heard about the 20s from everybody in my family or everybody even around where I grew up. Nobody was living like royalty. The only roaring they were hearing was from the coal tipple coming right down from Line 40. So I was very interested in writing about that untold labor history, that people aren't aware of, the fact that top 10%, maybe there's stock speculation, but if you look at the steel industry, the coal industry, the textile industry, growing cotton, there's a tremendous group of people on whose backs this country was built who were not acknowledged as part of the narrative. So that was, I think, one of the other things that really drove me about, like, these are stories that people need to understand and make part of the larger narrative of the U.S. So when I'd worked as a marketing executive for a not insignificant period of time, and moved back to Mine 37 from New York, rented a four-room miner's duplex in the town of Mine 37. It's actually I'm going to share a screen here. Am I able to do that just yet?
I will make it so you can.
Okie dokie.
Sorry.
No worries. I'm going to anyway, I'll show you a picture in a second, but I rented a four-room duplex, and I was fortunate enough that Millie Bike wrote this really great book called The Miners of Wilmer. So I started reading. I read The Miners of Wilmer over and over. Found out that a lot of her archives were housed at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. So a fellow up there, Phil Zorich, at the time, he let me make some cassette copies of some of the interviews she did. And I didn't talk to anybody who wasn't 75 years old, with very few exceptions. The whole, for like 4 or 5 months of the research part of the book, I spent a lot of time with Julia Swinchinsky, Margaret Swinchinsky. There's a fella, I bet his son might be on here now, but my uncle of mine, Tony Medosky, and the Black Hand also plays a role later in this novel. There were some interviews that I'd found that Millie had done with miners and their fear of the people in the Black Hand. and Tony was able to be really helpful with some of his own family lore about how people felt about the Black Hand, the kinds of things they did, and who the kind of thing you wouldn't find in a history book, but who controlled what neighborhood and all that sort of stuff. So I did that kind of research. See if I can pull up. So this is the town of Mine 37. This is actually, it's the cover of the book, which is set in 40, which is a little funny, but it's the town that I rented a house is actually this town, so it's sort of serendipitous. But yeah, they built all these identical company houses. And I would show you a picture of mine, but it burned down. So that's a whole other story. Oops. Oh, there we go. So yeah, I was doing a lot of research. I was also, looking at a lot of. This is pre-internet. I'm not pre-internet in any meaningful way in terms of communication, but I was still using microfilm, looking at old newspapers from this period. And sort of doing research into the history of the town. Okay. Let's see if we can maybe take a look at a few more quick pictures. So this is the company store in Mine 37. So if you were looking to purchase anything from mining tools to furniture to food, you were, of course, attending the company store, going to the company store to do your business. And as I said, you weren't actually paid in money. So yeah, that was a lot of the research, just being deeply involved in, learning about the formation of the town, the degree to which it was owned lock, stock, and barrel by the coal company, learning about the different ethnicities of miners and the way in which the coal company used the sort of divide and conquer technique to keep miners of different ethnic groups apart. They would donate money and land to, and I feel very weird talking about this with Millie Bike, because she knows this stuff 18 million times better than I'm ever going to. But donating money and land to, there's the Slovak Hall, there's the Hungarian society, there's the Polish Falcons. But we're going to give you this money and land, but we're going to always control who can have what kind of meetings there. And it also creates these separate enclaves. Is there are we having any kind of audio thing? Okay.
No, I think we're okay.
Okay, I saw a message from somebody.
We have one member of the group that's having some sound issues. I'm working with him. So go on, Damian.
Oh, no worries. And learning what the miners were, striking for pay for their dead work, not having their pay secretly lowered, especially retroactively, safer working conditions, and in the case of Wilmer, the right to organize itself. The strike, and I don't get much into this in the book because it's from the point of view of Chet, but part of what is going on is many of the miners through Pennsylvania are unionized and are striking for something. The miners in Wilmer are just they're striking for representation. And through talking with all these folks and listening to these interviews and reading, learned a lot about the dire situation that miners went through during the strike. As the town was owned lock, stock, and barrel by the coal company, you didn't have any right to be in your house if you didn't work there. So you're on strike. Huge numbers of people were evicted. And I wanted to show a picture of the and this is you can tell that the photography here is a little imperfect, but this is the tent camp that was set up, and some of the action of the novel takes place here. The tent camp behind Mine 40 that people are living in after they've been evicted. And there's a photo of an actual family, if you all can see that. And people were put out there living in tarps, and there was some one of the things that was unique about the situation with Wilmer was that E.J. Berwin, who owned the company, was so powerful, and he was getting very wealthy selling, or continuing to amass wealth by selling coal to the New York City subway system. And this is the Hirschfield Committee from New York actually came down and inspected, this is who these folks are, inspected the life in the tent camps, and they were utterly appalled at the conditions, and they issued a report. But I think one of the things I'll close in saying that the thing that blew me away was the degree to which people were brave, and they were willing to take big risks to get equitable treatment. And I think we're dealing with a not entirely dissimilar situation now. I think people need to band together because we're confronting similar challenges to those faced by the newly arrived immigrant miners. The only way to make progress in terms of fighting entrenched economic inequality, legally sanctioned disenfranchisement, and division based on national origin or race is by coming together and collectively demanding better.
Thank you. That was great. I'm now going to turn it over to John Hare, our president, and he's going to field some questions for you. John?
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you, Damian. I guess it's okay to call Professor Dressick Damian now.
Oh, yeah.
We really appreciate it. It's worth noting that just 2 years before the miners' strike, there was a huge steel strike, 1919, and that whole period was a really vital but very, very turmoil-filled period, particularly for immigrant families who, the thousands and millions of them that were recruited to come here. And many of them, just to make a point, many of them believed in what was on the Statue of Liberty, that there would be liberty and justice for all. A lot of their struggle has to be seen as a struggle to be what they thought Americans and America should be as well. And we so often forget that. Now, Damian, if you could talk a little bit more about the phrase voting with their shovels, what you had in mind and that.
Thank you, yes. Oh, by the way, I have to do a quick shout out. One of my former professors was kind enough, a writing teacher of mine, was kind enough, and I see Catherine Gammon, so thank you for coming on, Catherine. Yeah, absolutely. Wilmer, for the immigrant miners, and it was very much ethnic division was the lifeblood of the coal companies' ability to control the workforce. And part of this is this sort of very tiered system where people who were of one ethnic origin, who were considered white, this is not the Southern Europeans, where, oh, okay, so you guys can run for office, you can exercise some sense of political power. But so the only way that the immigrant miners had to exercise power was to stop working, is to sort of, literally vote with their shovels. And I do want to say a word or two about the brand of democracy. And we see so much of people not being able to vote. From the research I've done, people, and I'm sure Millie knows more about this than I do, but I believe some of this is some of the interviews that she'd done. And some older miners I talked to where it's not that they didn't want you to vote, is you had to vote. they would, make sure, here's your ballot. Now this is, we picked the people who are running, and you better vote for the right fella, or you're not going to have a job, or, oh, look, you picked the wrong guy. You better go back in there and vote, or you're not going to have a job. So the idea of, of actually, exercising the franchise via the ballot was very compromised for these people. And I think until they gained union representation, so they got a fair shake and were able to bargain with the coal company on some even footing, that was the only kind of, economic power was, the only way they had to exercise the franchise.
And Damian, there's a couple questions about the language that you adopt in the book and the style of speaking that comes out as you read. Did you learn that growing up in your family? Is it yours? Where'd you get it?
Well, it's funny. I mean, it's some of it in terms of language. The voice of the book is very much attempting to mimic my grandfather Alex, who actually was the man who went by Baldy. His manner of speaking. It's his cadence, his syntax, his linguistic preferences, with the exception of all the ethnic slurs. There's a sort of journey that if you buy the book, you'll sort of see this, that maybe Chet's buying into a little bit more of this ethnic division, sort of sees it more for what it is as we move through the book. That was very difficult I was very uncomfortable putting in a lot of that language. But I felt like it felt more important to me to show a character as he would actually be, and then sort of make this journey rather than whitewash the fact that, oh, people didn't talk like that. Am I still there?
Yeah, we can see you. Go ahead, Alan. You're going to have to work with Nathan to do that.
Okay. But yeah, so that, and then I did a lot of research too, and this is like other thing part of it, like listening to those tapes over. I'd play them from the. I brought no books with me. I brought the Bible and the Rough Guide to Opera when I moved down from New York to everything else in storage. And I'd listen to these taped interviews, and it'd be women that were recorded in the 80s, the 90s, talking, or men talking about, back in the, and this constant was the only voice, the only voices I was interested in hearing. I'd spent hours a day with an aunt of mine who was in her late 80s at the time. My grandmother, in revising the book, I actually lived with my grandmother for 4 months in the revision process. So yeah, I mean, and also just some research about mining terms. I don't know as much perhaps about the actual coal mining as I should, because as the mine is on strike, not a shovel of coal was mined during the book.
Okay, everyone, sorry for the screen. Damian, I think this is time maybe when I would like to introduce Millie and get Millie's reactions to what she's heard so far. And Alan, if you could please not try to share your screen, because we're just getting a black screen. So, Millie, are you there? And could you please tell us a little bit your reactions so far for hearing the book?
Well, I'm here, and I'm delighted to be here, and delighted to hear Dr. Damian Dressick talk about what I love to study and where my own roots belong and so forth. And I thought it humanizes aspects of the strike to write something in a novel in the form that he's done. And it sounds like it's very well written. I have to apologize. I do not yet have his book. It's on order. And I have, along with some other books, so I haven't been able to read it, but I enjoyed his reading very much. And I think it's so important to have both historical treatments of a subject. I'm not saying my book is the greatest, but something like that. And then to have a novel or other things that bring forth the humanity of these people and the actual living experience of them. Because labor historians, of which I consider myself, talk about an event, talk about strikes and very often can't get to that kind of material. I did write a little booklet, which I don't know if Dr. Damian, I'll just call him, has seen, but it's on the strike of 1922, and it's collected letters from foreign and other newspapers that talk in the actual terms in which they talked in detail. And the strike was very important. And the context of the strike was very important because it was this period after World War I when Wilson declared this was going to be a war for democracy. And then one miner in Wilmer, who lost his job and his house and everything after doing this, wrote that where was the democracy in Wilmer and made it public. Well, actually, the union was stupid. They forwarded it to the right address where he was mailing this thing, and not knowing that the mail people always sent anything that was directed to the union to the Berwind White Coal Mining Company. So he was outed right away. And this was I think it's important to have that aspect and to have the fact that the New York City used such coal and so forth and brought that out. I like the story of the scabs and the breaking into the homes. That happened. There was a rape of a woman that became very famous, and things like that happened. And if many people, when the evictions came, they moved out so that wouldn't happen to them. But I do want to say one other thing about the scabs. You have an Italian family, and I'm sure there were Italians and some other ethnic groups that tried to come in, but the biggest strike breakers in this whole strike were Americans. By that I mean Somerset County and Cambria County and other county people who were opposed to unions, who were often farmers, other people, but they were American born. So they had been in the United States longer than many of these immigrants. The immigrants, this was a 16-month-long strike. It actually went into 23. And the ethnic peoples that went back first were the large families who could not afford to continue to live in 10 colonies or and that sort of thing. And the one thing that we haven't talked about that I think is important is that the union, the larger union, and Nick might say some things about that, but District 2 was a very progressive union, so that the mines, and a lot of the mines in the county of Cambria and Indiana and so forth were unionized in 1922 when the national strike was called. Wilmer was unusual in that these people hadn't been able to get a union, and they got this union and used words like declaring safer democracy, and the wage cut that they got. What Berwind did, sitting on the Board of Estimate of the City of New York, was to raise the cost of coal for New York City to use on its subway system, was to raise it by some amount over $1, and it proportionally cut the wages of the Wilmer miners by that same amount. So they lost that, and that really helped to bring out everybody. But I am so happy that somebody is filling in the humanity and the details of these things, no matter what. It's so important because it's so dull sometimes to write just the dull history, and this brings it to life, and I'm very happy. And I recognize some of the places that he mentions. My 40 Hotel, I lived on 2nd Street, spent the first 13 years of my life in 940. And so I am very familiar with this. I'm familiar with the ethnic divisions from my research, and my father's family came from Hungary, and he went into the coal mines when he was 11 years old in 1914. So he spent his last work year was 1954 when he worked in 37 Upper Mine, which was for some of the older miners. And and it's interesting if you look at the Berwind notes about their time when people worked in the mines, and because they had to keep these records for black lung benefits later. that there was a big gap between the early period and then the 1922 on. They started new cards for 1922 because everybody virtually went out and strike. And it was a difficult thing. And District 2 helped because John L. Lewis, who was head of the union at the time, settled the national strike in August of 1922, but left former non-union miners like the ones in Wilmer out of the contract. And so they had to, District 2 held meetings with them and was very important in helping them continue because they had to test out, they held meetings to find out if the families wanted to continue and if the women could help, not only in doing with the scabs, but just in helping to feed people. My own family, my father and my grandparents left before they were to be evicted, which is what most people did if they were going to be evicted. They didn't live in a tent colony. They went to work in mines outside of Wilmer that had settled the strike, but miners were being paid because District 2 union miners paid money back to help keep the Wilmer strike going. And it's a wonderful untold story, and that I liked the way that the scabs were treated, but I have to say that the big strikebreakers were American born. And in fact, in my archives, I have some of the books of their payments during that time. I'm trying to think of what else I need to say. Their agency was so important. They didn't just lose the strike. It did have some impact, both negative things, but there was a whole continuum. And what my book does, that if you only focus on one strike, is see what went before and what went afterwards. And think about, we who live here in Pittsburgh, how important the Out of This Furnace book is as a novel about steel. Well, that's what I hope, when I read this, I hope I come out fully endorsing this as much as that, and would love to have that happen because it's so important and it's not well known. I never lived in a mining town again after I was 13 years old. But,
Emily, if I can interject, what kind of wages did your grandparents and parents make in the mills?
Oh, well, it wasn't much, but that was one other thing I thought I would mention. I don't think that Derwent used script very much. They did it was in their earliest years. They used credit as the thing. Everybody had a little book about this size, and you went to the company store, and I wish I had mine because I used to have to do this when I was a kid. Go to the store, get the supplies. They would write them down. It would be deducted from my father's paycheck. And they did that with everything. And some people think that everything was free. Well, it wasn't. And like the story of going down to the coal dump, that was illegal. If the police caught you in a non-strike era or something, you would have been really reprimanded for getting coal from the coal dump at Wilmer. And my own father, who was involved in this, the wages were not much because of that. Even the Wilmer Hospital, people are so fond of saying that this was built by doctors. Doctors had a lot to do with it, who were interested in the mining accidents because it was founded in the early part of the century. But miners contributed to it. They wanted one to take care of the accidents, and their paychecks were deducted for the cost of building the hospital, which almost nobody seems to know. But you see their early paycheck. And I wish I had mine. That it was enough. And one of the things to add to the strike, I've interviewed these people. I interviewed the man and his wife, the man worked in a company store in 40, and he walked around when the strike began and had to take everybody's book back because they could no longer shop at the company store. And his wife was that he married later, years later, was one of the families of these people, and you had to have separate interviews with them about this because she was furious, and he did it. He was embarrassed to talk about it. It was so pathetic because he came from a mining family too, but he didn't want to lose his job. And things like that happened. They had so many means of control as they said, it was a company town. It wasn't a nice little place where everybody was happy, which was what
Right.
we
Millie, thank you so much for for sharing this information and your book. And I know there's many other stories, and one of the other stories for another time would deal with how we got the marker in Windber over the opposition of the coal companies, right? And that's another story. We'll have to get that later, though. I need to move on to Nick, Millie. I'm so sorry, but okay. Yeah, sure. Maybe Nick can tell. Nick Molnar, Suzanne mentioned Nick Molnar as an organizer for the mine workers. He certainly was. He was also the UMWA District 2 president and district director now. And Nick's now retired, but we're so pleased that he's with us today, and we're interested in hearing Nick's reactions. Nick, are you there?
I certainly am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
Very well. I found your book quite interesting. I was sitting here squirming in the chair because, first of all, I agree with Millie. The statement or the intuition it's saying that the Italian scabs were coming up over the hill. It just kind of rankled my fur a lot because they weren't. The Italians were strike supporters basically in Wimber, and the Falcon Hall down in Wimber was the Ed Cosner's home local union met there. And after the strike in 1920, if you walked in that hall to a local union meeting, and everybody stood up and said, when Ed said to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and they go, "We pledge allegiance," and they'd sit down, they'd salute the flag and sit down, but they would not say the Pledge of Allegiance because they just hated the idea of the government intrusion, the way they felt the government intrusion on the coal mines, coal miners, and I always get mad when and I like I guess revisionist history is the best way I could describe it, or try to weave a story into the history of a coal strike. But to begin it by saying that starting out a book saying these young kids were hiding in the woods and stoning Italian coal miners, to me is just totally wrong. I mean, I just can't. I've only worked around coal miners and their families in the anthracite and bituminous fields for 30-some years, so I can hardly speak with authority. But I just don't understand why you'd want to do that. I hate seeing ethnic groups being singled out on any level. I mean, I was mad when I was out in the anthracite when they said the Italian miners there set a coal tipple on fire, and I was really upset about that. And then down here now listening to saying, well, these, can't remember how you pronounce that young man's last name, but it was supposedly a Polish rendition of the name, and it was throwing rocks at striking miners coming up over the hill, or scabs coming up over the hill. It's just kind of rankled me wrong. But other than that, it was, I guess, a well-written book. That's all I have to say.
Let me jump in there, Nick. I totally appreciate where you're coming from. Absolutely. I think you might need to read more of the book because you're only getting it from the 14-year-old boy's point of view right now, and there's more going on that he doesn't understand yet.
I understand that, but I'm just telling you, just from what, and I'll be the first to admit, and I talked to Miller this morning. I said I'd really like to have read the book before we were asked to do a presentation on this, and the book wouldn't be here until next week, I guess. But anyhow, I'm just telling you where I felt.
The great majority of Italians in the book are striking miners who are on strike with the rest of the miners. This is a very specific thing that I'm talking about. That in that scene, that again, I don't want to give away exactly what's going on yet, but it's not things are not as they appear.
I understand that things are never as they appear.
Nick, what's the situation of union coal miners in Cambria and other counties right now?
I'll give you a good example. When I first started getting involved with the union back in the day, there was 23,000 or between 23 to 27,000 people working in about a 6-county area right around here. Right now, if there would be 500, it would be a miracle.
Wow.
I mean, that's basically what it is. There's the coal market here is basically steam coal and met coal, and the steam coal market is dying, and the met coal market is it's basically on its deathbed here right now.
Thank you. I think this might be an opportunity to ask our participants here today if they would like to jump in and send a question to Nick or to Millie or to Dr. Dressick, and we could have a little exchange a little further. We'll give a little more time to that. So, so far I don't see too much on the chat that we haven't talked about. Dr. Dressick, maybe maybe something with respect to the women in the community and the role that they may play in your novel as well. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, this is one of the things. This is stolen actually right from Millie's book. The role of, so we've got women during the strike are I mean, and this is something I think was I like. It's exciting for me to learn this, that the women of the community were also down there on the picket lines, offering crusts of bread and pennies to the scabs, saying, well, if you're so hard up that you have to be, breaking this picket line, if you have to be, compromising our effort to unionize the mines, maybe you need this crust of bread, maybe you need this penny. So that detail really stuck for me in the Miners of Wilmer. I included it in one of the big picketing scenes where the narrator is seeing the women doing this.
On the women question, Suzanne, too? Is there?
No, I had another question. The women question.
The women question.
Yeah, the women question.
Okay,
no.
about that.
That I actually had a clarification. So toward the end of your reading, there was a line that was Yin's going to stay up in the 4th grade or something to that effect. You remember?
Oh yeah.
So I want to know how you spelled the first word.
Younz.
And what did you rely on for that?
In Pittsburgh today, that Yinz, Y-I-N-Z, has like a whole set of cultural associations with it, half ironic, half not ironic. And I felt like just using that consistently would pull people out of the time I was trying to write about and have them doing a lot of psychological wheel spinning that would just be counterproductive to the narrative I was interested in relating.
Thanks.
I see where Donna Drusilla has a question, Damian, with respect to what kind of health conditions would exist when people are living in tents in such a community? How were they able to survive?
Well, I think one of the things that Millie said is this was a really tough way to go. A lot of people were, and this happens in the book as well, people move away. they end up working on small mines that have settled, or that they can kind of get away with, or they're working at lumber camps. They're just drifting away from the patch towns. But I think it's very very challenging. One of the things that I learned recipes for making food from acorns. And there's a moment where they're doing this, they're bleaching, they're soaking the acorns in bushel baskets with water, trying to leach the toxins out of them so they can try and ground them into something they can eat. That's how hard up they are during toward the end of the strike.
Yeah.
You can't actually eat acorns without leaching these toxins out. I want to, disclaimer there.
I understand Charlie McAllister, our past president and noted labor historian, has a question. Charlie, are you still here? Uh-oh, his audio is not on, maybe. Nathan, why don't we try to track down Charlie? Okay.
I think he might just have himself muted.
Okay. Charlie, you know where the mute is, down on the lower left? No. Okay, we will, I think Millie, we may have time, if it's not too unfair to ask you to condense the story of the historical marker in Wilmer. Is it possible to do in a couple minutes or 3 minutes or so?
Well, I'll try, but I don't know if I can succeed. I gave a talk at UPJ, University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown, and Robert Weibel was head of the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission there, and I gave a talk about all the oppressive conduct and the agency of the Wilmer miners and what happened in their various strikes in 22, because Wilmer had its centennial, and this had largely been ignored by the powers that be that are still there. And from that, he encouraged me to write a proposal for a marker that told the other side of the story, because Wilmer already had a marker honoring the company's founding of the town. And I did, and I needed to have a person with a nonprofit, some kind of respectable agency that could verify this. And Charlie McAllister was president of the Pennsylvania Labor History Society, and he wrote this. We got the grant, and it was fine at first, but in the wording became a huge issue. And you have to understand that Wilmer still remains a company town in many ways, that's still the center of its mining empire. It is not nearly as powerful as it was in the until unionization, but it's still the center of its mining empire. And the town has to make all kinds of deals. The houses have deeds that that they have all these restrictions on their property that people are still trying to get rid of. And so the council opposed having this marker, which had the wording about the New York City saying that the living conditions of the miners who worked there were worse than the slaves before the Civil War. And they hated that. And Charlie and everybody, we all got together. The one woman on the council, one person on the council who supported us was a woman, Kelly Doer. And it was just a fantastic fight that Charlie and Nick were responsible for. And we got the marker, and Charlie can add to that because he tells this one part of the story very well.
Okay, Charlie, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I finally got, I couldn't get the cursor to move. But anyway, three quick things. Yuns, not yins. Y apostrophe UNS or YUNZ are to me much preferable. That's yuns, not yins. That's the middle class modern version, which I despise. Second of all, I have to defend the author in a way to my dearest friend Nick Molnar, because the Italians are the most complex of all the groups in terms of the wide range of ideologies which Italians brought with them, from anarchists to communists to socialists to mafia to Catholic, fervent Catholic right-wingers. So you had Italians could be all over the map in terms of where they stood on a lot of these things. There also were small business people that had an understanding of entrepreneurial things, so very quickly moved out of mines and mills and into small business. And when we confronted when Nick Molnar brought the miners to the meeting at Winber, 30 miners with their walkers and their oxygen, and confronted the city council, almost 80% of whom were Italian and who were conservative and business owners, and who were going to go right along with the company, until Nick's old miners went right up in their face and said, "I remember your dad in mine 37, and he would be ashamed of you." And we won that vote 9-0 to get the marker put in a belly bike.
That was great.
There were Italians on all sides of the issues. That's all.
Yes, there were.
Well, that seems like a great note for us to end on. And I want to thank you all, particularly for your patience with our technical difficulties this afternoon. We have a lot of things going on, apparently, with the fairies internet. Sometimes it happens on Zoom. We would love to see you all in person at the Pump House for this and other programs. It's just not possible right now, so we're trying to do it the best way we know how. The website has been posted in the chat box, and Nathan will post it for us again. If it's your first time joining the Battle of Homestead Foundation for a program, or your first introduction to us, please check out the website. Actually, everyone should check out the website because it's changing quite regularly now, with new programs and upcoming interesting things happening. I want to mention a couple of them. One is we're going to be launching our own podcast, and you'll hear more about that in the coming weeks, but we hope to be sort of on the forefront of labor history issues, current working issues, environmental issues. It will be a weekly podcast. Also weekly, we have a presentation called Charlie's Monday Marker, and that's our own Charlie McAllister, who will each week, in a relatively short presentation, under half an hour,
10 minutes. 10 minutes.
10 minutes, describe to us the various background, history, and intricacies of the various labor-related markers that you see in our region. And we have a lot of them. And if I'm not mistaken, Charlie McAllister is behind most of them. So this will be an interesting thing for you to check. It'll be Mondays by release, but they'll stay on there as well for a later viewing if you'd like. Our next monthly program is going to be on July 16th. It's in coordination with the United Steelworkers of America, a very exciting program featuring Dr. Amy Aronson, who has written a book about the revolutionary life of Crystal Eastman, who, as you probably know, is a true pioneer in workers' safety issues. She was a suffragist and one of the early founders of what became the ACLU. Just a fascinating woman, and the program on that day will take place at 7:30, I believe, perhaps 7 o'clock. Check the website. While you're at the website, if you're inclined, please consider a donation. We're all volunteers. We all do it out of the love of the subject. But it does, unfortunately, take some money to get things up and running, particularly the new podcast. So you might want to consider a donation as well. Is there anything you'd like to add, John?
Just a thank you to Damian and to
Yes.
all of the folks that have helped to make this this possible. And Damian, if you want to give a little boost to your readings with the Northern Appalachian Group. Why don't you just mention that before
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
First, let me just say thanks everybody for tuning in. It was really great to hear from Nick and from Millie and from John, from Charles. I mean, it's just wonderful. I'm a co-host along with Christina Fasonic of Wacona Live. It's a bi-weekly. We do it Mondays and Thursdays at 8 o'clock on Facebook Live. Just Facebook Writers Conference of Northern Appalachia, and you can see. Really, we've been very fortunate to get so many great readers on from the region.
And I want to add my thanks as well to everybody, Nick and Millie, Charlie. It's really wonderful to hear from you all. You have so much important information to impart. And Dr. Dressick, what a pleasure to hear you read your work. So thank you all. Thanks for your patience, and we hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.